All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you guys are enjoying your Friday. It's still morning for Britton, who's joining us here from the West Coast. We've had some technical problems this morning, but we're working this out because Britton has got some amazing information I want to share with you guys. This is kind of leading into our perfect storm that we are doing on Tuesday. Most of you guys know about it. We've been talking about it for a couple weeks, but is going to be talking about a lot of the science and neurology behind why kids are struggling, whether it's with ADHD, autism, the 2 ODD cases we've had this week, just general health. But a lot of that is due to just the body's inability to adapt to its environments. And one of those is because it's not getting the proper fuel that it needs. And that's why I wanted to bring Brittyn on with us today. She is an expert in nutrition. And I'm just going to stop talking and let you introduce yourself because she has quite a background in history, mostly personal, that's led her to where she is today. So Brittyn, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, like you said, my name is Brittyn, and I'm a registered dietitian, and I specialize in children on the autism spectrum. I grew up in Oklahoma. I was born in Tulsa and then went to high school in Norman and college at the University of Oklahoma and University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. And I'm currently located in San Francisco, so just a little far away, but we love it here. So I'm still continuing my business, but I have been interested in autism for nearly 25 years now. My brother was diagnosed on the spectrum whenever he was 2 years old, and it quickly becomes your life whenever it's someone that you love and care for. And so throughout my life, autism has always been something that I've been so passionate about because of him. And so whenever I was in undergrad and graduate school getting my RD, I decided to specialize in autism spectrum disorders, and even did my thesis with autism spectrum disorders and nutrient intake for children who are selective eaters. So I have some good background with autism and nutrition, and have started my own business called Autism Dietitian, where I do one-on-one consults with parents to help their children be successful and become better eaters whenever they are very selective. So I work with autism, but I also work with ADHD, sensory processing disorders, kids that are just selective and don't have any diagnosis. So I'm all across the board, but autism is something that I essentially market for, but I see all pediatrics.
Right, right. Yeah, and me and Brittyn met earlier this year. We got to sit down and have a really, really interesting conversation. I was actually blown away by, her, just the knowledge and life experience that she says already at this point. And that's what's amazing and why I want to bring her on here today. And I know a lot of you guys are watching this already, probably thinking to yourself, I need to connect with this lady and talk to her. Don't worry, I will share you all of her information within this video, and you can get in contact with her if you think this is something that you guys need, which you do. But when we had talked earlier, I kind of, gave Brittyn free reign to talk about what she wanted to today. And the main thing that she wanted to key on that we talk so much about is inflammation and how that plays such a huge role in how our body is actually functioning. So I'll just kind of turn it over to you so you can give us an idea of what you see kind of leads to such an inflammatory state and how that's affecting these kids from being able to function.
Absolutely. So we have chronic and we have acute inflammation. So acute inflammation is what we want. Our body needs that in order to fight different viruses and bacteria and infections. So whenever we get a cut on our finger, we have all of our white blood cells, flee to that area so that we can attack that invader and clean it up and not have an infection anymore. But what happens is that over time, if we are constantly having foreign invaders in our body that our body doesn't recognize as ourself, or it recognizes as something that should not be there, our body sends constant white blood cells and inflammatory markers to our body, our own body, and it becomes a chronic inflammation. And so we don't want this, because if we're constantly fighting, our immune system tends to tire out. And so whenever we have some sort of, other virus or bacteria, our bodies can't fight it because we've constantly been fighting whatever else is in our body, or constantly been fighting our own bodies. And so this can become a huge issue, can lead to chronic disease down the road, like type 2 diabetes and cancer and heart disease and many other issues, autoimmune diseases, you name it. And so we want to decrease the amount of inflammation that's in our body, because, like I said, if we're having chronic constipation or chronic inflammation, I deal with kids with chronic constipation daily, so it's almost built into my repertoire. So chronic inflammation, then our bodies can't work the way that they're intended to, and there can be many different reasons for that. Would you like me to go into those?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so chronic inflammation can be caused by many different things. We actually see in the research that individuals with autism already have this chronic inflammation response. And this can be from many different reasons. Some of it's unknown, why there's so much inflammation. We see inflammation in the gut, and we also see inflammation in the brain. And there's a huge connection between the two. And so it's important that we figure out what's causing this inflammation so that we can treat that root cause and figure out the issue rather than just treating all of the symptoms. And I see a lot of times some of the inflammation comes from, a lot of inflammation comes from the foods that we're eating. And there are certain foods that are naturally inflammatory, but there are also foods that can be individually inflammatory for each individual person. For example, food sensitivity. Some people may have a sensitivity to gluten or to dairy or to soy or whatever it may be. And so that causes individual inflammation where it may not be causing inflammation in somebody else. And so that's something that we really need to look for, because kids that are on the autism spectrum or that have, some gut issues too, we see increased rates of food sensitivity. And so testing for that can be really important so we can identify what is the cause of the inflammation. Just general inflammatory foods include sugar. Sugar is very inflammatory. And then also meats can be inflammatory too, because the inflammation is passed down from that animal to you if there was inflammation in that specific animal, which there is. And then dairy is another inflammatory agent too. And I see that in a lot of kids. That's a lot of times our main problem is dairy. I won't say that's the case for everybody, because everybody is different, but I see kids that have a natural inflammatory response to dairy, and then on top of that, they also have a sensitivity to dairy, and it can cause tons of issues like chronic constipation and skin issues, like dry skin or eczema, even, dark circles under the eyes, some behavioral issues, because those can be related to gut issues, and, many other problems as well. So when we're talking about inflammation, it's important for us to figure out the root cause and how we can fix that instead of just, throwing some medication on it. We need to address it with diet and figure out a diet that would work for that individual person and decrease inflammation in their body that way.
Absolutely. Now, how easy is it to test for these for kids? I mean, you have a specific way that you suggest?
I do. The testing that I use is called MRT. That's called the mediator release test. And so a lot of people, I will start saying, a lot of people will get confused between food allergies and food sensitivities. They're completely different. So food allergies, that is a type of antibody called IgE, and you can get that tested at the allergist, at your PCP. That's, just fine. You can also get your, your environmental allergens tested that way. Food allergies can be hard to test for. If you test for them on a skin prick test, it's not as accurate as getting a blood test. I've seen studies that show it's 60 to 70% accurate if you get a skin prick test for allergies versus I think it's a little bit higher with, I couldn't tell you an exact percentage for allergies getting a blood test. But for food sensitivities, we're not talking about food allergies. A lot of times you'll know if you have an allergy, you can tell that your throat is itchy or you may have a skin reaction right afterward, but we're talking food sensitivity, which is typically a delayed response, and it's an internal inflammatory marker. And so when we use this MRT test, it's not testing for IgE antibodies. It's testing for IgG, IgA, IgM, and T cell response, which is a inflammation response in your body. And so that's what we're looking for whenever we are testing food sensitivities. So this MRT test is the one that I use. It's a blood test, and I ship it to my clients. They go into a phlebotomist and get those 4 blue tops done. And then we send that off, and we typically get results back within 7 to 10 business days. And it gives us a whole report of 170 different foods and chemicals. So it includes dyes that may be causing an inflammatory response. And it'll give us in reds, greens, and yellows, and will tell us what foods we should be avoiding because they do cause inflammation.
My wife did a similar test a couple of years ago, and we were kind of blown away when we found out, because a lot of people are watching this right now and then think, well, my kid doesn't have any of those issues. And my wife, one of her big triggers was grapes.
Grapes, yes.
She would go through a bag of grapes in about 2-3 days, like it was no business. And we would consider that a health food. Mm-hmm. And once she found that out, she started eliminating these things. A lot of the stuff that we just don't relate to that food sensitivity just started going away for her. Mm-hmm. Just, chronic fatigue was one of the biggest things that she dealt with. No matter how much she slept, she was tired all the time. And once she started cutting those foods out, her energy levels just got so much higher. So a lot of what we see in the kids, you're speaking our language with a lot of what you're saying, is we see the same thing on the behavioral aspect with these kids. And whether it's in school or at home or whatever the issue may be, that food intake, and it's one of the first things we always ask about it in every consultation is, how's the kid's nutrition? And most parents will say, oh, they're pretty good. They had a bowl of cereal this morning for breakfast. And I'm like, that's not good. That's not what we're looking for here. So, we don't want to go into too much specifics about details parents can do. I'll save that for them being able to reach out to you to do that and talk to you if you wish to. But another thing that you really keyed on when we talked about the other day was nutritional deficiencies. Mm-hmm. That's a huge thing, because when we have, picky eaters and what was the term that you used for?
Picky eaters and problem feeders. Yeah, there's a difference. Yeah.
When we're limited and we're eating 1, 2, 3 different kinds of foods, we're not getting a vast array of nutrients. And while there's some good multivitamins out there, that's not the best. It's a better source, but it's not the absolute best source. It's best to get them, from plant-based or, from the food itself. So go ahead and talk to us about nutritional deficiencies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So whenever we have kids that are very selective in their eating, you can't get all of your nutrients from 3 or 5 foods, or even from 10 or 15 foods. That's still too few. And so I see kids all the time that have these nutritional deficiencies that we need to treat. So we can test for those there's a test that I do from SpectraCell, and it'll test 35 different micronutrients. So looking at vitamins and minerals, and if they're in the normal range, if they're borderline deficient, or if they're completely deficient. So that gives us an idea on what diet we should be using, what foods we should be focusing on adding to the diet. And then if they are a problem feeder, which is, like I said, picky eaters, they will typically have about 30 foods in their repertoire. They will eat a food even if it's reluctantly, but kids with problem feeding, they typically have under 20 different foods, and they will not touch a food. If you're offering it to them, there's no way they're going to eat it. They're going to tantrum, they're going to break down, they're going to have all of these behavioral issues. It can become quite an issue in parents who are trying to get their kids to eat healthfully. So if you're interested, I actually have a full chart on picky eaters versus problem feeders on my website. It was a recent blog post that I wrote. So if you're interested in reading about that, you can go see that chart and the difference between the two and help identify where your kid is. But whenever we do have, either one really, but mostly problem feeders, it really becomes an issue. And then behavior issues can become, really problematic when we have nutrition deficiencies, because we can't support our body if we don't have the right nutrients. Our central nervous system, our everything that controls our nerves and our brain, if we're not feeding that properly, we cannot function properly. Those senses aren't being able, those nerves can't transmit our senses properly, and we can't think properly, and we have brain fog and memory issues and cognition difficulty and all these different things. And so it's important that we do have proper nutrition, or else the rest of our body can't be supported and we can't function properly. So, when we're expecting a child with a diagnosis of ADHD to focus in school, if they have all these nutrition deficiencies that are causing, brain fog and all of these other issues, well, they're not going to be able to do that. We need to correct this issue before we can move on, because this underlying nutrition issue isn't going to fix itself. So we need to identify what's going on, fix it, and then we can move forward, because, we're not fixing the problem if we don't assess that underlying nutrition issue.
Well, and the sad part that we see in our office, I know you see a lot of this too, is the common thing for people to reach to is just Band-Aids or masking the symptoms. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily addressing the cause. Mostly because the first thing people do is they go to their pediatrician. And while I love pediatricians and, we all have our place, they don't study nutrition. That's not their expertise. That's where people like me come in to help out with that. And it kind of sparked something I've never really thought about. But these kids that are struggling in school so much, it's usually because what schools are feeding. The environment of school itself is not a great learning environment. And then you take, the mid part of their day and you feed them with a bunch of inflammatory-based junk. Mm-hmm. There's going to be no reason why they struggle even worse in the afternoons. And then they come home and all hell breaks loose at that point. So that's definitely a common thing that we talk about with parents trying to fix. So I'm glad you're able to touch base, and obviously much more of an expert on that than we are. So we're thankful to have you as a resource. Those were kind of the two main things that me and you talked about that we wanted to speak with. I want to give you is there any other things or tips or suggestions that you want to give parents that are watching this?
Well, whenever we're trying to get children to eat healthy foods, especially if they are a problem feeder or have sensory issues, it can be really, really stressful. And to get them to eat these foods, you can put the foods on their plate, but they're not going to eat it. So it's important that we address mealtime in a very positive manner. We never want to force or bribe or beg our children to eat foods, because that's only becoming an issue from that, if I can get my words out. But whenever we associate foods with this negative connotation, we're having kids not want to eat foods because they're having this negative feeling towards it. So when we address mealtime, we want it to be a very positive experience. Even using positive reinforcement, I will talk with many of my parents about using some sort of positive reinforcement program, whether it's stickers, go to the store, have your child pick out their favorite Transformer stickers or their, Frozen stickers or whatever it may be, and building some sort of chart where every time they try a new food or every time they get, touch a new food or smell it, they get a sticker and they get to work their way up to some non-food item where they can enjoy a trip to Target, or they can enjoy 20 minutes extra outside, or 10 extra minutes on the iPad, or whatever it may be, so that they're working for something and they're not just being forced to eat some food that they don't want to eat. Another suggestion would be starting small, because a lot of kids don't eat because of sensory issues. If they see half a cup of green beans on their plate or a full cup of green beans, there's no way that they're going to eat that. So it's important for us to start small and work our way up, because when you see one green bean, or maybe one green bean that's cut into slices, that's so much less threatening than seeing a full cup of green beans on the plate. So let's start small, start with one new food on their plate at a time. Let's not throw 3 or 4 new foods. That's too overwhelming. Let's start with one new food, start very small, and work our way up from there. And let's gain some trust within that. They need to know you're not going to force them to eat this food. Let's build a mutual trust around this. If they're not ready to eat it, that's okay. We'll try next time, or we'll take, let's touch it or smell it, or do some extra sensory step and help them learn to actually try the food and try it in a positive, not forceful way. So that's always something I really talk about with my parents, because it can get really frustrating as a parent not having the ability to get your child to eat the food that the rest of the table is eating. So I think we just need to change our mindset and look at it from a sensory standpoint. And I often place myself in that child's, in that child's spot at the table and think, okay, well, they're not eating asparagus because it's cooked this one certain way and I know they don't like this texture, or, maybe there's too much on the plate. I always just remove myself, put myself in the eyes of the child, and then go from there and see what would work best from them, knowing their sensory needs.
Those are some great tips. My wife and I may have to hire you to come over. Dinner time with this. So the holding them, holding their mouth open, shoving the food in there, that doesn't work.
Not always the best option.
It does not. Thankfully, our 11-year-old, we were kind of joking the other day, he's finally starting to expand the foods he eats. And he eats some weird. He's in a mustard phase right now, so he loves mustard, which I'd rather it be mustard than something else.
Sure.
That's awesome. Well, hey, I wanted to try to keep this somewhat short because I know a lot of people are getting really interested in what we're talking about here. I want to leave them a little bit intrigued so they can reach out to you and you can kind of touch base with them more. But also, guys, don't forget to register for the webinar that's coming up on Tuesday. I'll have the registration for the webinar posted below this video, and also I'm going to put Britton's contact information in there as well, so you guys will have it. But just so people can write it down now, what's your website?
My website is autismdietitian.com, and dietitian can be spelled a few different ways. The correct spelling is Dietitian. So autismdietitian.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, so please reach out.
That's good. And even though that you live out in San Francisco on the West Coast now, most of your business is done through consultations like this, correct?
I do all my videos over Zoom. So I don't, even clients in San Francisco, I still see them over video. So it makes it a lot easier for parents, especially who have kids with autism or ADHD. Taking them out of the home and taking them somewhere new can be really stressful. So video has been an answered prayer for my business.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm so glad me and you got to connect, and you reminded me I never reached out to you about actually doing those tests for my own kids. So I'm going to email you about that so we can get that done and hopefully get them started on better paths for too, because I'm not going to be the one sitting over here acting like my kids eat perfect either. So it's a battle. We get tired and they love cheese pizza, and that's easy to come by sometimes on the way home. But we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today, Britton. It was an honor to have you on here, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, have a good day, guys.
Bye.